In this video, I'd like to cover some of the things that my mother never explained to me, but which have led to rich insight as I've discovered these facets of the family system. And the purpose, the gift in this is that you may not have to wait as many years to grasp these things. The curse, there's always a shadow in any behavior. The curse is that you might be robbed of some of the muscle that I've developed in the effort to look at what is secret, to uncover what has been hidden, to bring awareness to what is unconscious. And in that way, what I say is more in my own language, because I never heard it in any other language. And so every time, every place has its gift, has its curse. And that's one thing that my parents never explained to me. And it's something that applies to this video as well as every other facet of your life. So one of the useful insights is that reality is fractal in nature. Meaning if you look closely inside of you as someone capable of articulating the English language, you will see in shadows of the adaptive personality every facet of your culture, of your cult, of your family. Because the mirror neurons in your body develop to empathize, which means to understand and to attune well enough to feel what it's like to be the other. And the survival element of empathy is predicting the future. If you have empathy, you can understand. If you understand deeply the how and why of another person or another culture, you can predict the future. Because cults are like combination locks or jigsaw puzzles or bowling balls colliding. They operate on a track. They have a hierarchy of values that predetermine what has to happen in a given situation. For example, in the chauvinism of the masculine that is present in all Western cultures and to some extent throughout the globe at this period of time, you will have a higher value placed on thoughts and a lower value placed on feeling. And this will be reflected in the amount of attention and time given to thoughts relative to feelings, and ask the number of times you will be asked what you are thinking rather than what you are feeling, and the amount of conversation that will be devoted to what you are thinking relative to what you are feeling. That's not an accident. It's a cult meme. It's an expression of chauvinism in the sense that the thought component in energy is the masculine expression and the emotional or feeling component in an expression is the feminine expression. In a chauvinistic culture, one is proud of one's thoughts and ashamed of one's feelings. If you look around you, you will notice that the majority of Americans or Brits or Australians or most anywhere you look, the majority of people, particularly men, will be proud of articulate thoughts and ashamed of vulnerable feelings. And they will defend their vulnerable feelings from view. They will deny them. They will hide them. They will gloss over them to cover the shame of being part feminine. Does it make any sense? Yes and no. In evolutionary terms, we are still very young as a species. If you think about the history of the universe, it's 24 billion years old, according to current estimates. And human beings are less than 1 million years old, according to current estimates. But the universe has more than 100 trillion years in its future. So we're a very, very tiny part of time. And as part of that tiny point in time, the awakening of awareness in the last 100,000 years has led to a prioritization of brawn, of sociopathic, strategic, masculine, male warfare to compete for limited resources. So when you have a low-competence species surrounded by energy, it can turn very little of that energy into sustainable well-being because it doesn't know what it's doing. We're surrounded by energy, and we are also a cult of unhappiness. A tremendous, more white middle-aged male commits suicide than most other demographics. More people commit suicide in the United States than die in car accidents, and we are a cult of cars. So in that light, there's a lot of unhappiness, which means there's a lot of ignorance, which means there's a lot of incompetence. Because we're surrounded by energy, we just don't know and or are not willing to transform this abundance of energy into sustainable well-being. The majority of the human race today does not feel a deep sense of love and belonging. The majority of humanity today does not have a deep sense of security. Now, when you understand Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, survival, security, love, and belonging, we're, as a species, hovering at 2 and 3, meaning we've got a low level of competence. As that competence develops, there is enough energy for every human being to meet all of their human needs abundantly, far more abundantly than we can currently imagine. Survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem doesn't take a single tree, doesn't take a single dollar to have an abundance of self-esteem. Doesn't take a single tree, a single dollar to have an abundance of love and belonging. It takes intelligence. It takes talent. It takes intelligence. So developing one's skills, one's gifts, and knowing what they are, discovering them and developing, that can take some resources depending on the arena of the skill. If you're an intuitive or an artist like Andy Goldsworthy that works with nature, it may not take hardly any resources, certainly no money. But it can take some energy to master the art of discovering one's skills and developing those skills, bringing those skills and expressing them abundantly to create value generates wealth, generates value for self and others. So it's a net positive. And becoming part of something bigger than ourselves, recognizing our role in a pattern of energy that is bigger than ourselves, and being of service to that doesn't take energy, it generates energy. The protocol of conscientiously and intelligently meeting our own and every other human need is a protocol of synergy, intelligence, and abundance. We just haven't mastered it, given that we're still largely relating through the traumatic language of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, through the reptilian brain that we are imprisoned inside as a function of institutionalized trauma, hereditary trauma, giving trauma and PTSD and complex PTSD from one generation to the next, combined with emotional illiteracy, with traumatic illiteracy, with relational illiteracy, reflected in the fact that many of us will die in this century without a single competent hour of formal literacy in any of the key areas, be it relational literacy, traumatic literacy and repair, emotional literacy, psychological literacy. We hear little memes going around, but they are more likely to be ignorant, shame-based, fear-based memes than they are to be scientific expressions of psychological literacy based on science, because we do not value the psyche, the self, enough to study it with the science that we study bridges and the manufacture of various suspension forms of architecture or skyscrapers. We have that to a relative science. But we cannot build a marriage as reliably as we can build a skyscraper. And that reflects the biases, the lack of intelligence of our time. Now, your job is to transcend the cult, to become happy by fulfilling and meeting your human needs and then teaching others to do so. Another area that's covered in the general expression of illiteracy is understanding what love is. We pay lip service to it, but we don't actually have an educated population of people who know what love is. This is reflected in the fact that if you are a child, you are far more likely to be molested, to be raped, to be beaten, to be traumatized by a close family member who loves you than you are by a stranger. On top of that, despite the fact that a stranger is far less likely to damage our children, the coaching to the child is, in the light of this data, self-harming. Because we tell our children, don't relate to strangers. Instead, relate to the people who are statistically 75% more likely to traumatize you in the most severe ways of your life. So 75% of the risk is at home. Don't talk to strangers, listen to your parents, right? So we as a cult are marginally insane, are marginally schizophrenic in these areas. And that's just the state that we're in today. Now, intelligence is expressed, is demonstrated, is measured by the efficiency with which energy, often broken down to time, money, and natural resources, the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into sustainable well-being. That is the measure of an intelligent person. But we as a cult do not measure intelligence in this way. We measure intelligence by how many degrees you have, regardless of how much student debt and impoverishment you cause getting those degrees, regardless of how unhappy you are getting the degrees, and regardless of how useful or useless the degrees are in generating sustainable well-being for yourself and others. In other words, we as a cult are not intelligent enough to measure intelligence, to actually be able to present intelligence intelligently. And unfortunately, as some wonderful research, I think it's Dunbar, but it could be someone else, pointed out that it takes competency to evaluate whether we are competent or incompetent. And 85% of the people in a given field are not highly competent. And as a result, they think they are competent when they are not, because they are not competent enough to assess who is and who is not competent. And the general public does not have the competence to evaluate who is or isn't competent. So if they meet a therapist or a doctor or a teacher who says they are highly competent, we haven't been taught to assess competence other than to look at badges and degrees, which is a symbolic, dumbed-down heuristic model that is supposed to, at its best, express value, but in many cases misleads. In many cases, if you follow the highest-ranking expert, whether it's a politician or a judge or a police chief or whatever it is, in many cases, you will end up in a very low level of intelligence if you follow that protocol. Meaning, if you look at how much money is spent to lock up Americans in prison, it's more than $100,000 a year. So if you think of, okay, so we had $1 million, and you found someone smoking some marijuana. You had $1 million to make life more interesting, to build a theme park in the community for $1 million, or to do this or do that. But you thought the most important use of that money, and the most important use of that concrete, and the most important way for the prison guards to spend a lifetime was sitting in or outside a concrete cell block. That's your brilliant idea to manage someone smoking a plant that's been smoked or eaten for thousands of years on many continents. Or you think algebra is more important than learning to build a house or learning to grow organic food. Nothing wrong with algebra, but with a growing homeless population, really? If you look at the experts who think they're experts and have the title of experts, and you do things the way they suggest they be done, very often you find an equation where a massive amount of time, money, and natural resources is spent to create mediocrity for all, to create suffering, dead ends, despair, misery, loneliness, frustration for all concerned. And this is a fractal pattern, meaning you'll find this inside of yourself. The parts of you that pretend they know everything often know very little. The people in your family that pretend they know everything often know very little. The parts of me that think they know the most may be completely out to lunch. And because they're out to lunch, they don't know they're out to lunch, right? Because that requires competency. And the same is true of whether it's your president or world leaders or nonprofits or whatever it is, the liberals, the Democrats. There's very little intelligence. And because there's very little intelligence, there's a lot of people that don't understand that there's very little intelligence, because that takes intelligence to be able to analyze systematically. And we're not doing that. We do not know, as of the making of this video, who the most competent 5% of parents are in this country. We could know. It just hasn't occurred to us to try and figure it out. We don't know who the best 5% of the therapists are in this country. We could know. We haven't figured that out either. We don't know who the 5% best teachers are. They could be designing our schools. We just haven't even bothered to find out who they are. We don't know the happiness versus despair chart of our own community, let alone the country, even though it's free to graph that. And anyone could ask, and the population could be invited to be transparent. We haven't figured the most basic stuff out because we're so dumb that we don't want to know, because we believe that if we did know, it would be overwhelming and we couldn't do anything about it. And based on that, we don't gather the data. And so we stay ignorant and we prove ourselves right in our belief in our inadequacy. So these are some challenging things. So what about love? What is love? Because you're going to meet people who say they love you. You may say, I love you. But what kind of love is it? You have the child in each one of us that loves someone because we need them. I need you. I need you. I need your comfort. I need your praise. I need your body. I need you. So I say that's love. For an infant, that's love, need. We'll find a variety of people that want us, that find us attractive, or that we find attractive. I want the way you look. I want the way you make me look. I want the way my body feels in my imagination, touching your body. I want you. It's the adolescent. I want you. You could be useful to my agendas, and so I love you, meaning I want you. I love you. So you have to ruin your life and do this and that and the other to have sex with me right now because I want you and I need you. So say the child and adolescent. I mean, I don't care. You'll find that the narcissism and self-centeredness of lust has no regard for people's career or marriages or education or routine or emotional well-being after the act. I need you. I want you. And so it's just fine that you don't pass your university exam on the night because I love you. But this is the kind of love that people who have been around the block a little bit come to fear. Someone says, I love you. Which is it? Do you need me and are you going to suck me dry? Do you want me and are you going to manipulate me into getting what you want and then disposing of me. Because children and adolescents are narcissistic and self-centered, as they should be. It's just that we don't teach people how to grow up into adults. We don't even teach people what an adult is. And so there's a lot of children and adolescents hunting for love as a taking energy, as a control energy. I've got to control you because I love you, i.e., I've got to control you to secure what I need from you and what I want from you. I don't care about you, other than that you maintain your supply of good feelings for me. I need you. I want you. And so we raise children and adolescents who don't know what adulthood is. And love becomes a scary word because we don't even differentiate between I love you as a child, I love you as an adolescent, I love you as an adult. And because 2/3 of those are likely to be life-harming, when somebody says I love you, often there's a cringe, like, oh my gosh, how can I get out of this? Don't love me, because I don't want to feel bad. I want you to take something from me. I don't want you to need me and I can't do what I want to do because you need me and need to control me. I don't want that. So this is child and adolescent love, and we don't really learn the difference and what that is and why and what's going on there. But then there's adult love, which is much more rare and more important. And nobody turns away from adult love. It's just so uncommon to meet an adult who knows how to love well that people may turn away from adult love because we just have one word. It's like saying weather. I like weather. I don't like weather. I want to be loved. I don't want to be loved. I need love. I don't need love. It's not the right time to be loved. I desperately need love. We don't break it down, and it's very important to understand what adult love is. First of all, it is loving enough to care. If you don't care about yourself, you haven't learned to love yourself. It's loving enough to care. It's caring enough to take time. If you don't care enough to take time to love yourself, you don't love yourself. It takes time. It's taking enough time to see. If you don't love yourself enough to take the time to see yourself clearly, you don't love yourself. As an adult, it's seeing enough to understand. And if you just look at someone, there it is. But I don't know how the blood's streaming through that face. I don't know what that is. I don't know what those words are. I see it. I just don't understand it. I don't understand the language. I don't understand the vocabulary. I don't understand the patterns, the structure, how they fit together. I don't understand you. If you do not understand yourself, you do not love yourself. It's taking enough time to see. It's seeing enough to understand. Now, if you say, okay, I get it. This happened to you when you were 5, then this. Now you get, every time there's a bang, you get all nervous and flustered because it reminds you of Vietnam. And okay, I understand how it works. But it's understanding enough to empathize. Meaning, if you really understand, there's different levels of understanding. You can understand as an abstract idea with zero empathy. A sociopath can be marvelous at understanding in order to manipulate, for example. But that's not love. It's understanding. It's understanding enough to empathize. To empathize. which goes back to caring, to care about what you understand. Like, oh, that looks painful. That looks scary. That looks exciting. Your face really lights up. To empathize, which is a deeper octave of caring. It's caring enough to take time, but it's understanding enough to empathize, to care. And it's empathizing enough. You could say, I really care about you. You're hungry. I've got a plate of food over here. You're so hungry. I get it. I'm pretty full. Got a plate of food here. But I don't empathize enough to adapt, to change, to attune to the situation. I've got a bowl of food here. I'm pretty full. I really get how hungry you are, but I don't empathize enough to offer you a plate of food. I don't empathize enough to attune. So love, self-love, is I see myself, I understand myself, I empathize with myself, and I change. I really get how painful it is inside my body when I criticize and shame myself. I really understand that, and I feel how much that hurts. And so I change. I recognize it's in my purview. I forgive myself. I acknowledge it's painful, that I have some influence here, and I make a change. I make a choice to not criticize myself in that way. And then I assess, right? I look at, do I feel better? Is my life going up? Am I meeting more of my human needs because I made a change? It's empathizing enough to attune. And it's attuning enough in a relay. It's attuning enough to succeed at surviving, developing security in that survival, which in a capitalist cult includes an investment nest egg of some kind, developing one's skill. I attune enough to meet my needs for love and belonging, learning to love and welcome all parts of myself, to understand them, to attune to meet all parts of myself. And I attune enough to earn self-esteem, to have ideals, to have principles, to have values, and to live by those and measure myself. How well am I living by my stated values and protocols? To earn self-esteem, to then develop my gifts, bring those gifts powerfully and abundantly into the world, to become part of something bigger than myself. Now I love myself. And by loving myself, I now know how to love you. Now, sometimes it's easier to love somebody else, and then you learn how to love yourself, particularly if they don't know how to receive it or what love is either, right? Then you might practice with somebody else and then do it more to yourself, and then love yourself enough to see who is capable of receiving your love. So these are some thoughts that were not given to me in the family system, but which I give to you. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.